The train hissed to a stop at the edge of nowhere. Brock Maddox stood on the platform like a structure built by the mountains themselves. 6 feet 11 inches of bone, muscle, and silence. His shadow stretched across the weathered planks, swallowing the smaller figures who gave him wide berth. People didn't meet Brock's eyes in Cedar Falls. They nodded respectfully, sometimes nervously, then found urgent business elsewhere. He'd grown accustomed to it. Solitude had become his closest companion over 32 winters in the Colorado high country. The locomotive belched steam into the autumn air. Passengers stepped down clutching carpetbags and children, their faces tight with the anxiety of arrival. Brock scanned each one, his chest tightening incrementally with each wrong face. Then she appeared. Serafina Hale descended the train steps with the deliberate grace of someone who refused to be hurried. She wore a deep green traveling dress that had seen better days, her dark hair pinned in a style that suggested practicality over fashion. But it was her eyes that stopped him, sharp, assessing, completely unafraid as they locked onto his towering frame. She walked directly toward him while other passengers veered away. "Brock Maddox?" Her voice carried a rasp like whiskey over gravel. "Yes, ma'am." His own voice rumbled low, unused to extended conversation. "Good. I'm Serafina, your bride, apparently, though that word tastes strange in my mouth." She glanced around the rough settlement with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This is Black Ridge country?" 20 miles north. We'll stay in town tonight, head up at first light." "Why wait?" The question caught him off balance. "Trail's rough in darkness. Easier to—" "I didn't travel 800 miles to sleep in a boarding house when there's ground to cover." She gestured toward a wagon loaded with her belongings. "That yours?" "It is." "Then let's move." Brock had corresponded with Serafina for 6 months through carefully written letters. Her words on paper had been thoughtful, sometimes funny, occasionally sharp. But the woman standing before him carried an intensity the ink had never captured. She wasn't delicate, she wasn't soft, and she clearly had no intention of waiting for his permission to do anything. "Trail's dangerous at night," he tried again. "Mountain lions, loose rock. You've driven it in darkness before, I'd wager." "That's different." "Because I'm a woman?" Her eyebrow arched. "Or because you think I'll shatter if the wagon hits a bump?" Someone behind them snickered. Brock turned his head slowly, and the sound died. When he looked back, Serafina was already walking toward the wagon, her worn boots striking the ground with purpose. "Well?" she called over her shoulder. "You coming, or do I drive myself up?" Brock followed, aware of every eye in Cedar Falls tracking their interaction. The town's curiosity had been building for months since word spread that the mountain giant had sent for a mail-order bride. Most figured he'd chosen someone desperate, someone with no other options who'd tolerate isolation in exchange for security. Looking at Serafina's straight spine and the set of her jaw, Brock suspected those assumptions were about to shatter against reality. The ride up Black Ridge lived up to its reputation. The trail narrowed as they climbed, winding through pine forests that blotted out the moonlight. Loose stones clattered beneath the wheels. More than once, the wagon lurched toward a drop that would send them tumbling into darkness. Brock kept his hand steady on the reins, hyper-aware of his passenger. Serafina didn't gasp, didn't clutch the seat. She watched the trail with the same assessing gaze she'd turned on him, occasionally pointing out obstacles before his lantern revealed them. "There, left side, that rock. See it? Tree branch, low." "Got it." After the 5th warning, he glanced at her. "You done this before? Mountain trails?" "Not these specifically, but I grew up in hill country. Kentucky backcountry, where roads were suggestions and mules had more sense than most men." She adjusted her shawl against the cold. "My father ran timber operations. I learned to read terrain before I learned to read books. Letters didn't mention Kentucky." "Letters didn't mention a lot of things." She met his gaze directly. "Yours either, I'd imagine." She wasn't wrong. Brock's letters had painted his life in broad strokes. The ranch, the isolation, the beauty of the high country. He'd left out the brutal winters, the town's suspicion, the way loneliness could sink into bone until a man forgot what conversation felt like. He'd written about wanting a partner, about building something lasting. He hadn't written about the nights when silence pressed so heavy he thought he might disappear into it completely. "Why'd you answer?" The question emerged before he could stop it. "My advertisement. You could have chosen anywhere, anyone. Serafina was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't respond. Then, because your letters didn't lie about wanting easy. Most men write poetry about gentle companionship and quiet hearths. You wrote about hard work and harder winters, about needing someone strong enough to build something real. She turned toward him. I'm not built for gentle Brock Maddox. Never have been. Every place I've lived, every town I've tried, they wanted me smaller, quieter, more like their idea of what a woman should be. Her voice hardened. I'm done shrinking. Your letters suggested maybe you weren't looking for someone to shrink. The wagon crested this final rise, and Black Ridge spread before them. In daylight, the view stole breath. Endless mountains rolling toward horizons, valleys thick with pine, peaks that scraped clouds. At night, it looked like the edge of the world, dark and vast and unforgiving. Brock's cabin sat in a clearing carved from wilderness. Solid timber construction, a stone chimney, corrals and outbuildings arranged with practical efficiency. Not grand, but built to last. He'd poured 5 years into this place, every log positioned with his own hands. Home, he said simply. Serafina climbed down before he could assist, landing with practiced balance. She walked a slow circle, studying structures by lantern light. Brock watched her, trying to see the place through fresh eyes. Probably looked rough. Probably looked lonely. Probably looked like exactly what it was. A solitary man's attempt to carve order from chaos. Good bones, she finally said. Roof solid. Drainage looks smart. That your work? All of it. Then you know what you're doing. She gestured toward the main cabin. Show me inside. The interior reflected its builder. Everything functional, nothing decorative. A large hearth dominated one wall. A table Brock had built himself sat near the kitchen area. The bedroom occupied a separate space, divided by a heavy curtain, clean, organized, Spartan. Serafina set her bag down and walked through methodically, running fingers along joints, checking the chimney draw, testing the water pump. Her inspection felt less like judgment and more like inventory, cataloging assets and challenges with the same practical eye she'd turned on the trail. Needs work, she said, but it's good work. Honest work. Something in Brock's chest loosened slightly. I can add shelving, make space for your things. Our things now. She turned to face him fully. We should talk plainly, Brock. We're strangers who made promises through paper. I meant what I wrote. I'm here to build something real, to work beside you, not behind you. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm difficult. I have opinions. I don't take orders well, and I sure as hell won't be decorative. Didn't ask for decorative. No, you didn't. That's why I came. She moved closer, and even with her average height, she seemed to fill space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. But those people in town, they looked at you like you were carved from the mountain. They looked at me like I was baggage you'd collected. That going to be a problem? Town talks. Always has. Talking's one thing. Expecting me to play a role I didn't sign up for is different. Her gaze intensified. I need to know now. Did you want a wife or did you want the idea of one? A warm body to make the cabin less empty? Someone to cook and clean and stay quiet? The question landed like a challenge. Brock had asked himself variations of it during the long months of correspondence. What did he actually want? The truth twisted, complicated, and uncertain. But standing in his cabin with this fierce stranger, he reached for honesty. Wanted someone strong enough to choose this life, not just endure it. His voice stayed low but steady. Wanted a partner, not a servant. He struggled with words that felt too large for his mouth. Wanted to stop being alone in a way that mattered. Serafina studied him with those sharp eyes, weighing his answer. Finally, she nodded once. Fair enough. Then we'll figure it out together. But I'm telling you now, I'm going to disappoint people. I'm going to do things that make the town whisper. I'm going to work the ranch, handle livestock, and probably get into trouble you didn't anticipate. A slight smile touched her lips. Still want a wife? Despite everything, the strangeness, the uncertainty, the way this woman had already turned his expectations inside out, Brock felt something like hope stir. Yeah, I do. Good. She extended her hand. Then let's shake on it proper. Partners. Her grip was firm, calloused, and completely without hesitation. Brock's massive hand engulfed hers, but she didn't flinch. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who'd gambled on letters and hope, sealing an agreement more binding than any ceremony. I'm a light sleeper, Serafina said, releasing his hand. Fair warning, and I snore sometimes when I'm exhausted, which I am right now. You can take the bed tonight. I'll make do with... You take it. I'll use the loft. Brock gestured toward the ladder. Built it for storage, but it's comfortable enough. That wasn't the arrangement. Arrangement can wait until you're not dead on your feet. He grabbed a blanket from a chest. We've got time to figure out sleeping situations and everything else. No rush. For the first time since stepping off that train, Serafina looked slightly uncertain. You sure? Positive. She nodded slowly, some tension leaving her shoulders. All right then. Thank you. Welcome to Black Ridge, Serafina Hale. Maddox, she corrected. Serafina Maddox now, for better or worse. The name hung in the air between them, strange and new and somehow right. Brock climbed to the loft while Serafina moved behind the bedroom curtain. He listened to the small sounds of her settling in, boots hitting the floor, the creak of the bed frame, a quiet sigh that might have been exhaustion or relief, or something else entirely. Sleep didn't come easy. Brock stared at the rough-hewn beams above him, processing the day's upheaval. He'd expected, what? Someone grateful? Someone overwhelmed? Someone who'd need protecting from the harsh realities of mountain life? Serafina Hale Maddox had arrived like a force of nature, unimpressed by his size, unintimidated by the isolation, already challenging assumptions he hadn't realized he'd made. She was nothing like what he'd imagined, and that recognition carried both thrill and terror. Morning came cold and clear. Brock woke to sounds in the kitchen, metal on metal, the pump working, footsteps. He descended the ladder to find Serafina already dressed, hair braided back, working the stove with competent efficiency. Coffee's ready, she said without turning. Found your stores, hope you don't mind. It's your kitchen, too. Our kitchen. She poured 2 cups, handed him one. I've been thinking about the ranch. What needs doing first? Brock accepted the coffee, still adjusting to another presence in his space. Firewood, mostly. Winter's coming hard. Then the north pasture fence needs mending before snow flies. After that, show me. What? The ranch, all of it. Can't help if I don't know what we're working with. She sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim. Unless you'd rather I stay inside and learn to bake bread? The question carried an edge. Brock shook his head. I'll show you. They spent the morning walking the property. Brock pointed out boundaries, water sources, the livestock scattered across grazing land. Serafina asked questions constantly about drainage, winter feed, predator problems, market access. She noticed things he'd stopped seeing. A weak point in the barn foundation, erosion starting near the main trail, opportunities to expand the corral system. You run cattle? She asked, studying his small herd. Some. Mostly horses. Better market for them in mining country. Smart. She leaned on a fence rail. Kentucky taught me horses. I can ride, break, and train if needed. Might need all 3. Brock hesitated. Town might have opinions about a woman doing that kind of work. Serafina's laugh was short and sharp. Brock, I guarantee the town already has opinions about me. Might as well earn them. She wasn't wrong. When they rode into Cedar Falls 3 days later for supplies, the stares started immediately. Women clustered outside the general store stopped mid-conversation. Men tipped hats with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Brock felt the weight of attention like physical pressure. That her? Someone whispered, not quietly enough. Bold as brass, just like I heard. Poor Brock. He'll have his hands full with that one. Serafina walked beside him, spine straight, giving no indication she heard the comments. But Brock saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her jaw set harder with each whispered judgment. Inside the general store, Martha Hendricks presided behind the counter like a self-appointed moral authority. Her gaze swept over Serafina with the precision of a tax assessor finding discrepancies. Mrs. Maddox, I presume. Martha's tone suggested she presumed nothing charitable. That's right. Serafina met her stare directly. Welcome to Cedar Falls. I'm sure you'll find our community very traditional. We have certain standards here. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. There's a ladies' auxiliary that meets Tuesdays. We'll be happy to help you understand how things are done properly. Appreciate the offer, Serafina said evenly, but I'm generally too busy for meetings. Ranch work doesn't pause for social calls. Martha's expression soured. Ranch work? Surely Brock doesn't expect you to— I expect to pull my weight. Serafina's voice stayed polite but firm. Same as anyone. How unusual. Martha turned to Brock. Your usual supplies? They completed the transaction in stiff silence. Outside, Brock loaded the wagon while Serafina stood nearby, apparently unbothered by the continuing stares. A cluster of women approached, led by Eleanor Crow, wife of Silas Crow, the wealthiest landowner in Black Ridge Country. Mrs. Maddox. Eleanor's greeting was cooler than the autumn air. We couldn't help but overhear. Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of frontier life. Women here support their husbands, but we don't pretend to do men's work. It's unseemly. Interesting, Serafina tilted her head. What's unseemly about honest labor? It's not appropriate. You'll make Brock look weak, unable to provide properly. Eleanor glanced at the other women for confirmation. No respectable woman? Then I suppose I'm not respectable. Serafina's smile was sharp. Good thing I'm not seeking your approval. The women gasped collectively. Eleanor's face flushed red. You're new here, so perhaps you don't understand. There are consequences for women who refuse to know their place. And what consequences are those? Serafina stepped closer. Social exclusion? Gossip? Judgment from strangers? She laughed without humor. I've survived worse than small-town disapproval, Mrs. Crow. I'll manage. Brock finished loading and moved to Serafina's side. His presence scattered the women like birds, but not before he caught the venom in Eleanor's parting look. They drove out of town in tense silence. I made enemies, Serafina said finally. First day. They made assumptions. You challenged them. Does that bother you? What they think? Brock considered the question carefully. Town opinion had never mattered much to him, couldn't afford to care when you stood out like he did. But he'd hoped, maybe foolishly, that bringing a wife would somehow normalize his position, make him less of an outsider. Serafina's confrontation had probably accomplished the opposite. No, he said, surprising himself with the truth. It doesn't bother me. She looked at him, really looked, searching for sincerity. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. Good, because I can't be someone else. I've tried. It nearly killed me. The rawness in her voice caught him off guard. What happened? Before Kentucky? She stared at the trail ahead. I was married once, young and stupid. Thought love meant compromising yourself until nothing remained. He wanted a decoration, wanted quiet and compliant, so I tried. Her hands clenched. Tried so hard I lost myself completely. Woke up one day and couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror. What'd you do? Left. Walked away with nothing but what I could carry. He kept everything else. House, money, reputation. Told everyone I was unstable, ungrateful, unfit for civilized company. She turned toward Brock. So when your letters talked about wanting someone strong, someone real, I figured maybe strength mattered more than propriety. Maybe real mattered more than respectable. It does, Brock said. To me, anyway. Then we'll probably be fine. She managed a slight smile. Even if the town thinks we're both crazy. They settled into patterns over the following weeks. Serafina proved herself capable beyond Brock's expectations. She handled horses with skill that matched his own, worked fence repair without complaint, and attacked ranch problems with creative solutions he'd never considered. She also refused every attempt by Cedar Falls society to domesticate her. When Martha Hendricks arrived uninvited with a basket of welcome gifts and thinly veiled instructions on proper wifely behavior, Serafina thanked her politely and sent her away with equal politeness. When the ladies' auxiliary showed up to help her adjust, she put them to work mucking stalls until they fled, horrified. When Eleanor Crow suggested that Brock's reputation suffered from having such an unconventional wife, Serafina smiled sweetly and suggested Eleanor focus on her own marriage. The town buzzed with scandalized gossip. Brock heard it every time he came down from the mountain. That wife of his, poor Brock, what kind of woman? He ignored it all, which only seemed to fuel more speculation. Meanwhile, something unexpected was developing in the cabin on Black Ridge. Brock had lived alone so long that another person's constant presence felt strange at first. Intrusive, even. But Serafina moved through the space with a naturalness that somehow made it feel bigger rather than smaller. She reorganized without overstepping, added touches without imposing, and created comfort without demanding intimacy. Brock wasn't ready to navigate. They worked in tandem by day and talked by the fire at night. Real talk, not the careful politeness of strangers. She told him about Kentucky, about her failed marriage, about years spent trying to fit into spaces that rejected everything she was. He told her about growing up different, about the way his size made people nervous, about building this ranch as proof he could create something permanent despite the isolation. "Doesn't it get to you?" she asked one evening. "The loneliness?" "Used to. Got numb to it after a while." He stared at the fire. Figured this was just how life worked for someone like me. "Someone like you? Too big, too quiet, too much." He struggled with words. "People see the size and either want me to be gentle as a lamb or dangerous as a bear. Nobody just sees me." "I see you," Serafina said quietly. "Not the legend, not the giant, just Brock." He looked at her then, this complicated woman who'd crashed into his organized solitude and shaken everything loose. "What do you see?" "Someone who built something beautiful out of hard ground. Someone who keeps his word. Someone who's been alone too long because the world's too small-minded to appreciate what's different." She met his gaze. "Someone I'm glad I gambled on." The moment stretched between them, loaded with potential neither seemed ready to name. Then Serafina yawned, breaking the tension, and announced she was going to bed. Brock remained by the fire long after, thinking about loneliness and connection and the strange mathematics of two difficult people trying to build something together. October bled into November. The first snows dusted the peaks. Brock worked longer days, racing the weather to finish winter preparations. Serafina matched him hour for hour, never complaining about the brutal pace. They hauled firewood, reinforced buildings, moved livestock to sheltered grazing. By the time the first real storm hit, they were as ready as possible. That's when Silas Crow arrived. Brock was shoeing a horse when he heard the approach. Multiple riders, moving with purpose. Silas Crow led them, a lean man with silver hair and eyes that calculated value in everything. Behind him rode 3 ranch hands and Eleanor, wrapped in expensive furs. "Brock Maddox." Silas dismounted with practiced ease. "Haven't seen you since summer." "Been busy." Brock kept working. "I can see that." Silas's gaze swept the property appreciatively. "You've improved the place. Good water, strong timber, excellent grazing. This ridge has real potential." "Not for sale." "I haven't made an offer yet." Silas smiled. "Although I will, eventually. This land should be part of something larger. Managed properly, it could support serious operations. Right now, it's just underutilized." Brock straightened to his full height, hammer still in hand. "It's supporting what it needs to support. That's enough." "Is it?" Silas's expression turned pitying. "Brock, winter's coming. Drought's been brutal. Springs are weakening across the entire region. A man alone might weather it, but a man with a wife, with responsibilities?" He shook his head. "Pride won't keep your livestock alive when the water runs out." "I'll manage." "Will you?" Silas glanced toward the cabin. "I've heard interesting things about your new bride. Unconventional woman. Must be challenging dealing with someone so willful." Brock's grip tightened on the hammer. "Serafina's not your concern." "Of course not. I'm simply saying that if circumstances change, if the winter proves too harsh, my offer stands. I'll pay fair value, help you relocate somewhere more suitable, somewhere with less isolation." Before Brock could respond, Serafina emerged from the barn carrying a saddle that would have given most men trouble. She registered the visitors without breaking stride, set the saddle down and walked over, wiping her hands on her trousers. "Mr. Crow?" Her greeting was neutral. "Mrs. Maddox. Lovely to see you again." Silas's smile was calculated charm. "I was just telling your husband that this is quite the undertaking for a newly married couple. If you ever find the isolation oppressive—" "I find your visit oppressive," Serafina interrupted. "The isolation's fine." Eleanor's scandalized gasp was audible. Silas's smile tightened. "Direct. I appreciate that. But you're new to mountain winters. The reality might reshape your perspective. Maybe. Serafina moved to stand beside Brock. Or maybe we're tougher than you think. For your sake, I hope so. Silas mounted his horse with fluid grace. Winter reveals weaknesses. Remember my offer when the storms come. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Crow. Gentlemen? They rode off, leaving tension in their wake. Brock watched them disappear down the trail, unease settling in his gut. He wants this place, Serafina said quietly. He wants everything. Man's been buying up land for years. He'll wait for us to fail, then swoop in with a rescue offer. She turned to Brock. We can't let that happen. Don't plan to. Good. Her hand found his arm, squeezed once. Because I didn't come all this way to surrender at the first sign of trouble. Winter arrived early and hungry. By December, snow buried the high country under relentless white. Temperatures plummeted. The drought Silas mentioned proved real. Springs that should have run strong barely trickled. Brock rationed water with increasing severity, watching his reserves drop steadily. The town offered no help. If anything, Cedar Falls seemed to be waiting for the mountain giant and his stubborn wife to admit defeat. Supplies grew expensive. Credit tightened. When Brock rode down for essentials, he faced knowing looks and barely concealed satisfaction. Tough winter, the blacksmith observed. A lot of folks struggling. Some are making smart decisions, selling out before things get worse. Not selling. Pride's expensive, Brock. You've got a wife now. Might want to consider what's best for her. Brock bit back a response and left. But the words gnawed at him during the cold ride home. Was he being stubborn? Was his refusal to sell driven by principle or pride? And how much hardship could he ask Serafina to endure before it became cruelty? She met him at the barn, took one look at his face, and knew. They're talking. Always talking. About us failing. Yeah. Serafina helped him unload supplies in silence. Finally, she said, Are you doubting? Doubting what? This. Us. The decision to stay. Brock considered lying, offering easy reassurance. But they'd built something on honesty, and he wouldn't undermine that now. I'm doubting my right to ask you to suffer through this. You could have had easier. Could have chosen someone established, somewhere comfortable. I could have. Didn't want to. She faced him squarely. Brock, I chose hard. Chose real. Chose building something from scratch with someone who values the same things. Easy doesn't interest me. Never has. Even when easy means warm and fed and secure? Security's a myth. Comfort's a trap. Her voice intensified. I've had both. They came with cages I couldn't see until they'd locked completely. I'd rather freeze on this mountain beside you than be comfortable and imprisoned somewhere else. You might actually freeze. This winter's serious. Then we'll freeze together. She stepped closer. I'm not leaving. I'm not giving up. And I'm sure as hell not letting Silas Crow win. So stop looking for permission to quit, because you won't get it from me. The fierceness in her eyes, the absolute certainty, did something to the knot of doubt in Brock's chest. Not dissolving it entirely, the winter's challenges remained real, but redistributing the weight so it didn't rest solely on his shoulders. All right, he said. We fight. Damn right we do. December gave way to January, and the mountain showed no mercy. Livestock struggled. Water became a constant worry. Brock and Serafina worked brutal hours just maintaining basics. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now pressed heavy and claustrophobic. Days blurred together in endless cycles of survival. Then Serafina started getting sick in the mornings. She tried to hide it, disappearing before dawn, returning pale but composed. Brock noticed anyway. Hard not to notice when someone you lived with suddenly couldn't keep breakfast down. You all right? He asked after a particularly bad morning. Fine, just something I ate. Serafina. She met his gaze and he saw everything there. Fear, hope, uncertainty, determination. I'm pregnant. The words hit like physical impact. Brock stood frozen, trying to process implications that spun too fast to catch. A child. Here, in this brutal winter with failing water and mounting challenges and a town waiting for them to break. How long have you known? Few weeks. Wanted to be sure before saying anything. She wrapped her arms around herself. I know the timing's terrible, I know this complicates everything, but it doesn't complicate anything. The certainty in his voice surprised him. It changes things. That's different. Changes them how? Brock moved toward her, placed his massive hands gently on her shoulders. Makes failure not an option. Makes this fight about more than pride or land. Makes it about family. Tears welled in Serafina's eyes, quickly blinked back. I'm scared. Me too. I don't know how to do this. Be a mother. Raise a child in conditions this harsh. We'll figure it out. He pulled her close, felt her tension gradually ease against his chest. Same way we figured out everything else. Together. She stayed there, wrapped in his arms, trembling slightly. Brock held her. This fierce woman who'd challenged everything and felt the full weight of responsibility settle onto shoulders built to carry impossible loads. A child. His child. Their child. Growing in the middle of a winter that wanted them dead. The mountain had tested them before. Now it was preparing something worse. February arrived like judgment. The drought intensified impossibly. Springs that had trickled now failed completely. Snow fell heavy but offered no help. Meltwater wouldn't come until spring, and they needed water now. Livestock began dying. The herd Brock had built over years withered steadily. He rode to neighboring properties, seeking help, finding nothing. Everyone faced the same crisis. Those who could afford it bought water hauled from distant sources. Those who couldn't watched their animals die and wondered how long until they followed. Silas Crow's offer came again, delivered by a ranch hand who rode up through brutal cold specifically to remind Brock that salvation remained available. For a price. Mr. Crow says his offer still stands, the man announced, but prices are dropping as more people sell. Wait too long. Might not be worth what you think. Brock sent him away without an answer, but the temptation gnawed harder now. Not for himself, he could endure anything. But watching Serafina struggle through pregnancy and worsening conditions felt like slow torture. Every morning she woke pale. Every evening she pushed herself despite visible exhaustion. Every day he wondered if his stubbornness was courage or cruelty. We need to talk, he said one night. Serafina looked up from the mending she'd been working on. Her belly showed now, a gentle swell that made his chest ache. About selling. About options. Options implies we have them. She set the mending aside. Brock, I know what you're thinking, that staying risks the baby, that leaving protects us. Doesn't it? Maybe. Or maybe leaving means admitting defeat, teaching our child that hard times mean surrender. She stood, moved to the window. My father used to say that mountains don't make people. People make themselves against mountains. This baby will be born here or elsewhere, but I want them born to parents who fought, not parents who quit. Even if fighting costs everything, everything's already been cost. She turned back. We've lost livestock, lost income, lost whatever goodwill the town might have offered. All we have left is this land and each other and the choice of what we become through this. Her hand rested on her belly. I want to become someone who stood. Don't you? Brock looked at her, really looked. Saw the exhaustion, yes, but also the unbroken spirit. The same defiance that had challenged him that first day on the train platform. The refusal to bend that had defined her from the beginning. Yeah, he said. I do. Then we stand. They stood. Through February's worst, through diminishing supplies and dying animals and nights so cold the cabin walls cracked audibly, through Serafina's increasing discomfort and Brock's mounting fear, through isolation so complete it felt like they were the last humans alive on a planet determined to erase them. And then, on a night in late February, when the thermometer registered 20 below and wind howled like dying things, Serafina's water broke. Brock stared at the wet stain spreading across the floor, his mind refusing to process what it meant. Not now. Not in this storm. Not when the nearest doctor was 20 miles away through impassable snow and temperatures that could kill exposed flesh in minutes. It's early, Serafina said, her voice tight but controlled. She gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. 6 weeks early. How early is too early? The question came out strangled. I don't know. She breathed through what was clearly a contraction, her entire body going rigid. But ready or not, this baby's coming. Brock's hands trembled as he guided her toward the bedroom. His mind raced through impossible calculations. The storm outside was a monster, the kind that buried entire homesteads and didn't release them until spring. Even if he could somehow reach town, which he couldn't, no doctor would attempt the ride back in these conditions. They were alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. "I need you to focus," Serafina said, gripping his arm hard enough to hurt. "I need you here, not disappearing into panic." "I don't know what to do." "Neither do I." Another contraction seized her, and she gasped through clenched teeth. "But we're going to figure it out together, same as everything else." The next hours blurred into a nightmare of helplessness. Brock had delivered foals, calves, helped ewes through difficult births. But this was different. This was Serafina, writhing in pain he couldn't fix, fighting a battle he couldn't join. He boiled water because that's what people did, gathered clean cloth, stoked the fire until the cabin was sweltering, and felt utterly useless through all of it. "Tell me what you need," he begged. "I need this to be over." She panted between contractions, sweat soaking her hair. "I need our baby to be healthy. I need—" Her words dissolved into a scream that seemed to tear the air itself. Brock knelt beside the bed, let her crush his hand, whispered things he'd never said before and might never say again. Hours stretched like years. The storm outside howled its fury, but inside the cabin, Serafina's agony drowned out everything. Somewhere past midnight, the baby came. Brock caught his daughter in shaking hands, stared at the impossibly tiny, perfectly formed human covered in blood and vernix, and waited for the cry that would signal life. Seconds passed, then more. The baby lay silent and still, her skin an alarming shade of blue-gray. "Why isn't she crying?" Serafina's voice cracked. "Brock, why—" He didn't think. Instinct from delivering breech calves took over. He cleared the baby's mouth and nose, rubbed her back with desperate gentleness, breathed carefully into her tiny face. Nothing. She remained limp and silent, a fragile doll in his massive hands. "No." The word came out broken. "No, no, no." Serafina tried to sit up, failed, her body too exhausted to respond. "Give her to me." "She's not breathing." His vision blurred. I can't. Give her to me now." He placed the baby on Serafina's chest, watched her tear open her nightgown with fumbling fingers, press their daughter's tiny body against her skin. She rubbed the baby's back, murmured words Brock couldn't hear, and prayed in the wordless way of mothers facing the unthinkable. Then, thin and reedy and impossibly beautiful, a cry pierced the cabin. The baby gasped, coughed, and screamed with the outrage of the living. Color flooded her skin. Her tiny fists waved at the injustice of existence. She was real. She was alive. She was theirs. Brock collapsed beside the bed, all the strength that had sustained him draining away completely. Serafina wept, holding their daughter with trembling arms, whispering fierce promises about protection and love and survival. The storm outside continued its assault, but inside, in the firelight, something stronger than weather had just won a battle against death itself. "She needs a name," Serafina said eventually, her voice raw but steady. Brock looked at the tiny life nestled against her mother's chest. "What do you want to call her?" "Something strong, something that means she fought and won." Serafina touched their daughter's downy head. "Clara, after my grandmother, toughest woman I ever knew." "Clara Maddox." Brock tested the name. "Yeah, that fits." They sat together as dawn broke gray and cold beyond the frosted windows. Clara nursed with surprising vigor for someone so small and early. Serafina drifted in and out of exhausted sleep. Brock kept watch over both of them, his mind still catching up to the reality that he was a father now. That this fragile, fierce scrap of humanity depended on him for everything. The storm raged for 3 more days. Brock barely slept. Between caring for Serafina, who'd lost more blood than seemed survivable, and monitoring Clara, who was alarmingly small and struggled to maintain body temperature, he had no time for rest. He crushed herbs into teas that might help with bleeding, kept the fire roaring despite dwindling wood supplies, and changed cloth diapers with hands too large for such delicate work. On the second day, Serafina developed a fever. "It's normal," she insisted, even as chills racked her body. "Just my body recovering." But the fever climbed. By nightfall, she was delirious, mumbling about Kentucky and timber operations and horses she'd trained as a girl. Brock pressed cold cloths to her burning forehead, forced water down her throat, and watched helplessly as infection claimed ground despite everything he tried. Clara slept in a drawer padded with blankets, positioned near the fire, but not too close. She was so small. Too small. Brock could cradle her entire body in one hand. When she cried, a thin, mewling sound that barely qualified as noise, he picked her up with exquisite care, terrified his strength would somehow damage her. "You have to fight," he told Serafina during a lucid moment. "Clara needs you. I need you." "I'm trying." Her eyes struggled to focus. "But I'm so tired, Brock, so tired of fighting." "I know, but you don't get to quit. Remember what you told me? We stand, we fight, we don't surrender." That was before everything hurt this much. "It still counts." He gripped her hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. Don't stop being that now." She drifted away again, lost in fever dreams. Brock sat beside the bed, holding Clara against his chest, feeling her rapid heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. 2 lives depending on him, and he had no idea if he was doing anything right. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now seemed like punishment. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Serafina woke clear-eyed and weak, finding Brock asleep in the chair beside her bed, with Clara tucked in the crook of his arm. She watched them for a long moment. This giant man who'd been terrified of fatherhood now cradling their daughter with the careful tenderness usually reserved for handling explosives. "Brock." He jerked awake, instantly alert. "You're back." "Was I gone?" "For a while." He helped her sit up, positioned pillows behind her. "Fever had you pretty bad. You kept talking about horses and your father and someone named Thomas." "My brother died when I was 12. She reached for Clara, and Brock placed their daughter in her arms. "How is she?" "Stubborn. Like her mother." He managed an exhausted smile. "Won't eat unless held a certain way. Screams if the room's too cold. Already has opinions about everything." "That's my girl." Serafina studied Clara's tiny face. "She's so small." "Doc would know if that's normal, if she's developing right. We'll get her checked when the storm clears." Serafina looked toward the window. "It is clearing, isn't it?" "Starting to. Maybe another day." They sat in silence, exhaustion wrapping around them like a blanket. Brock watched Serafina nurse Clara, saw the wince she tried to hide, the way her hands shook slightly. She'd come through childbirth and fever, but recovery would take time they might not have. Winter still held them tight, and now they had an infant to protect through conditions that killed healthy adults. When the storm finally broke, Brock saddled his strongest horse and made the brutal ride to Cedar Falls. He found the doctor at home and dragged him back up the mountain despite protests about the condition of the trails. Dr. Morrison examined both Serafina and Clara with professional efficiency, his expression growing more concerned with each passing minute. "The baby's underweight," he said bluntly. "Premature births often struggle. She needs to be kept warm, fed frequently, monitored constantly. Any sign of breathing trouble, blue lips, inability to wake, you get her down the mountain immediately." "And Serafina?" "Lost significant blood. The fever suggests infection, though it seems to have resolved. She needs rest, good nutrition, and no heavy labor for at least 6 weeks." Morrison closed his bag. "Frankly, I'm surprised she's alive. Women die from less all the time." "She's tough. Tough only gets you so far." The doctor's gaze was grave. "You're facing a hard situation, Brock. A premature infant in the middle of winter, miles from help, with a mother who needs recovery time you can't afford to give her. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but someone needs to say it plainly. This is dangerous. For all of you." After Morrison left, Brock stood in the cold barn and let the weight of reality crush down. The doctor was right. Everything was stacked against them. Clara was fragile. Serafina was weakened. The ranch still demanded work that couldn't wait. Water remained scarce. Feed was running low. And Silas Crow's offer sat like a dark promise in the back of his mind, whispering that salvation required only surrender. He could sell, take the money, relocate somewhere easier, give Serafina time to recover properly, give Clara access to medical care, give himself permission to stop fighting a battle that seemed increasingly unwinnable. The thought made him sick. "Talking to yourself now?" Brock turned to find Serafina in the barn doorway, wrapped in a heavy coat, looking pale but upright. "You should be in bed." "I've been in bed for days, needed to move." She walked toward him carefully, each step measured. "What did Morrison say that you're not telling me?" "That we're in over our heads, that Clara might not make it, that you need rest we can't afford." He met her eyes. "That we should probably give up." He didn't say that last part. Didn't have to. It's what everyone's thinking. Serafina leaned against a stall, breathing hard from the small exertion. "You considering it? Giving up? Considering what's best for you and Clara. That's different." "Is it?" She studied him. "Or are you looking for permission to quit because the fight got harder than expected?" The accusation stung because it carried truth. "I'm looking at reality. At a wife who nearly died and a baby who might still die in a winter that hasn't finished trying to kill us. At what it means to be responsible for lives beyond my own. And you think leaving solves that?" "It might." "No." Her voice hardened. "It trades one set of problems for another. We sell to Silas, move somewhere easier, and what? Spend the rest of our lives knowing we abandoned the first hard thing that came along? Teach Clara that when life gets brutal, you run? Teach her that staying alive matters more than pride. This isn't about pride." Serafina pushed off the stall, moved closer. "It's about who we are, about whether we meant what we said to each other or if those were just pretty words for when things were easy. Nothing about this has been easy. No, but it's been honest, real, built on choosing hard over comfortable." She gripped his arm. "Brock, I almost died bringing Clara into this world. I fought through labor and fever and pain that felt like it would tear me apart. You think I did that just to quit at the first sign winter's not done with us? You did it because you had no choice. I always have a choice, so do you." Her eyes blazed despite her exhaustion. "Choose to stay. Choose to fight. Choose to believe that what we're building here matters more than comfort or safety, or whatever easy life Silas Crow's money could buy." Brock looked at her, really looked. Saw the fire that hadn't dimmed despite everything. The refusal to break that defined her from the moment she stepped off that train. And he recognized something in himself, something he'd been dancing around since her water broke in the middle of that storm. He was terrified, not of the mountain or the winter or even the possibility of failure. He was terrified of this, of love that made you vulnerable, of caring so much that loss became unbearable, of opening yourself to pain that dwarfed anything physical. He'd spent years building walls, learning to need nothing, convincing himself that solitude was strength. Serafina and Clara had demolished those walls completely, leaving him raw and exposed and absolutely certain that if anything happened to them, it would destroy him. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know, me too." She took his hand, placed it on her chest where her heart beat steady and strong. "But fear doesn't mean we run. It means what we're doing matters." They stood together in the cold barn, breath misting in the air, holding on to each other like anchors against a tide that wanted to sweep them away. Finally, Brock nodded. "We stay." "We stay," Serafina confirmed. Over the following weeks, they developed a rhythm born of necessity. Serafina recovered slowly, pushing herself harder than Morrison would have approved, but not so hard she collapsed. Brock took on every task he could manage, working before dawn and after dark to compensate for what she couldn't do. Clara grew incrementally, each gained ounce of victory, each day without crisis a gift. The water situation worsened. What little spring flow remained diminished to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Brock melted snow, which helped but couldn't sustain livestock long term. Animals continued dying. The herd he'd built over years shrank to a fraction of its former size. Every loss felt like a piece of himself carved away. In early March, with temperatures still brutal and supplies critically low, another visitor arrived. Not Silas this time, but Eleanor Crow, dressed in furs and superiority, riding side saddle up the mountain trail like she was arriving for a garden party. Serafina answered the door, Clara wrapped against her chest in a makeshift sling. "Mrs. Maddox!" Eleanor's smile was all teeth. "I heard about your daughter. Congratulations." "Thank you." Serafina didn't invite her in. "I also heard she came early, in the middle of that dreadful storm. How terrifying that must have been." Eleanor's gaze was calculating. "No doctor, no help, just you and Brock facing such a crisis alone. I can't imagine." We managed. Did you? Eleanor glanced past her into the cabin. The town's been wondering about the baby's health, about your recovery, about whether two people can really sustain a ranch under these conditions while caring for a premature infant. The town can keep wondering. Mrs. Maddox, Serafina, may I call you Serafina? Eleanor didn't wait for permission. I'm here as a friend offering help you clearly need. My husband's offer still stands, but more than that, I'm prepared to assist with childcare, to send our doctor up regularly, to ensure your daughter gets proper attention. In exchange for what? Nothing. Simple Christian charity. Eleanor's expression was pure poison wrapped in piety. Although, if you and Brock did decide to accept Silas's offer, we could arrange immediate assistance, housing in town during the transition, medical care, everything you need. We don't need charity. We need to be left alone. Pride is a luxury you can't afford anymore. Eleanor stepped closer. That baby is tiny and weak. She needs more than this cabin can provide. Your husband is working himself to death trying to sustain the impossible. How long before something breaks? Before Clara pays the price for your stubbornness? Serafina felt rage rise like fever. You don't know anything about my daughter or what she needs. I know she deserves better than freezing in a mountain cabin while her parents play at being pioneers. Eleanor's mask slipped, showing the cruelty underneath. I know that when she dies, and premature babies often do, you'll have to live with choosing your pride over her life. The slap came before Serafina realized she'd moved. Eleanor's head snapped sideways, a red mark blooming on her perfect cheek. They stood frozen, both shocked by the violence. Get off my property, Serafina said quietly. And tell your husband if he sends anyone else up here with threats wrapped in charity, I'll do worse than slap them. Eleanor touched her cheek, eyes wide with genuine surprise. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, appreciative almost. There's the fire they whisper about. Good. You'll need it. She turned toward her horse. When you fail, not if. When, remember you had options. Remember you chose this. She rode away, leaving Serafina shaking with adrenaline and fear. Because Eleanor was right about one thing, Clara was small and fragile, and every day was a gamble against odds no parent should have to face. Brock found her later, sitting by the fire with Clara asleep in her arms, tears running silently down her face. Eleanor came by, she said. I saw her leaving. What did she want? To remind me that our daughter might die, that we're failing, that pride will cost us everything. She looked up at him. What if she's right, Brock? What if I'm putting Clara at risk because I'm too stubborn to admit we can't do this? He sat beside her, wrapped one massive arm around her shoulders. Clara's gaining weight. Morrison said so last visit. She's feeding well, sleeping better, getting stronger every day. But she's still so small. She's a fighter, like her mother. Fighting doesn't guarantee winning. No, Brock agreed. It doesn't. But quitting guarantees losing. And I'd rather go down fighting than live knowing we surrendered without trying everything. Serafina leaned into him, Clara nestled between them. I'm so tired, Brock. Tired of fighting, tired of worrying, tired of wondering if we made a terrible mistake. I know, but I can't quit. Even if I wanted to, I can't. It's not in me. I know that too. They sat in silence, watching the fire, holding their daughter, drawing strength from proximity and shared exhaustion. Outside, winter continued its assault. Inside, they continued resisting. March crawled toward April. The drought reached catastrophic levels. Brock rode to neighboring properties again, finding abandoned homesteads and desperate families packing wagons. The mountain was breaking people, forcing surrender through relentless attrition. Those with resources fled. Those without prayed for mercy that wasn't coming. He returned home one evening to find Serafina standing in the doorway, Clara in her arms, staring at something in the distance. He followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. Smoke rose from 3 different properties, controlled burns, clearing structures before abandoning land. The message was clear. People were giving up. The mountain had won. How many does that make? Serafina asked. 7 families in the last month. Brock dismounted, his body aching from another day of impossible labor. Maybe more. Will there be anyone left? Silas and his holdings, few others stubborn or stupid enough to stay. Which are we? Both, probably. She turned toward him, and he saw the decision in her eyes before she spoke. I have an idea. It's risky, maybe crazy, but I think it could work. I'm listening. The springs are failing because the drought dried up surface water, but there's water deeper down, has to be. The mountains are full of it. She shifted Clara to her other hip. What if we dig deeper? Create a new well that reaches water the drought can't touch? That's weeks of work, maybe months. No guarantee we'd find anything. Better than watching everything die while we wait for snowmelt. Brock considered the proposal. She was right about the timeline. Digging a well by hand would be brutal, time-consuming labor that might yield nothing. But the alternative was watching their remaining livestock die of thirst while they rationed every drop for themselves and Clara. Where would we dig? Serafina pointed toward a low area near the northern property line. There. The way water flows when it rains, there's got to be something underneath. It's our best shot. You're talking about moving significant earth while recovering from childbirth and caring for an infant. I'm talking about surviving. Her jaw set. I can rig a sling for Clara, work in shifts, rest when needed. But I won't sit idle while we fail by inches. He wanted to argue, to insist she'd done enough, that this was his burden to carry. But he'd learned something over these months with Serafina. She wasn't someone you protected from hard things. She was someone you fought beside. All right, he said. We dig. They started the next morning. Brock excavated while Serafina worked the pulley system they'd rigged to haul earth and stone. Clara slept in her makeshift sling against Serafina's chest, waking periodically to nurse, seemingly unbothered by the constant motion. They worked dawn to dusk, then collapsed into exhausted sleep, only to wake and repeat the cycle. The first week yielded nothing but dirt and rock and blistered hands. The second week brought underground rock formations that required pickaxes and brute force to penetrate. By the third week, Brock had descended 15 feet into earth without hitting water, and doubt crept in like ground frost. Maybe we're in the wrong spot, Serafina suggested. Maybe there's nothing to find. Or maybe we haven't gone deep enough. They kept digging. People from town heard about the effort and rode up to watch these two fools refuse reality. Some offered pity, others offered advice. Silas Crow offered one final purchase price, lower than before because desperation had driven market values down. This is foolish, Brock, Silas said, standing at the well's edge. You're killing yourself for nothing. Not nothing. No? What then? Pride? Stubbornness? The fantasy that hard work guarantees success? Silas shook his head. The mountain doesn't care about your effort. It takes what it wants regardless. Then it'll have to take more, Brock said from the bottom of the hole. Because I'm not done yet. Silas left, but his words lingered like smoke. Because he was right, in a way. The mountain didn't care. Nature had no stake in human survival, no interest in rewarding effort or punishing surrender. The universe was fundamentally indifferent, and all their fighting might mean nothing against forces beyond their control. That night, with Clara asleep and Serafina soaking her bleeding hands in cold water, Brock stood outside and screamed his frustration at the indifferent sky. Screamed until his throat was raw and his voice gone and the rage had somewhere to go besides inward. Then he went back inside, kissed his sleeping daughter, held his exhausted wife, and prepared to dig again tomorrow. On the 28th day of excavation, at a depth of 22 feet, Brock's pick struck something that wasn't rock. The earth turned dark and damp. He dug faster, ignoring exhaustion and caution, and watched water seep through the broken ground. First a trickle, then a flow, then a rush that pooled around his boots and kept rising. "Serafina!" His shout echoed up the shaft. "We hit it! We hit water!" Her face appeared at the top, backlit by afternoon sun, Clara's tiny head visible in the sling. She stared down at him, standing in rising water, and her expression transformed from exhaustion to something like disbelief. "Is it good water? Clean?" He cupped his hands, drank deeply, tasted mineral and earth, but nothing foul. "It's good." "Then we did it." Her voice broke. "We actually did it." Brock climbed out, soaked and filthy and grinning like a lunatic. Serafina met him at the top, Clara between them, and they stood at the well's edge watching water rise toward the surface. It wouldn't solve everything. Winter wasn't over. Supplies remained tight. They'd lost most of their herd. But they'd found water where everyone said none existed. They'd refused surrender and won something real. That night, word spread. Neighbors who'd watched them dig came to see the result. Some congratulated them. Others asked to buy water. A few looked at the well with envy, barely disguised as admiration. Brock agreed to sell some, enough to help others survive without depleting their own reserves. Within days, the dynamic shifted. People who'd written them off as foolish started calling them resourceful. The well became proof that stubborn defiance could defeat impossible odds. Serafina and Brock, the mountain giant and his wild wife, became something other than objects of pity or scorn. They became the people who'd refused to break. But the mountain wasn't finished testing them yet. April brought something worse than drought. It brought Silas Crow's patience running out. The well changed everything for Brock and Serafina, but it also changed the calculation for their wealthiest neighbor. Land with reliable water was worth more than land dependent on seasonal springs. Much more. And Silas had built his empire on recognizing value before others caught on. He arrived 3 days after the well started producing, bringing 4 men Brock didn't recognize. Not ranch hands. These had the lean, hard look of men paid to intimidate rather than work cattle. They spread out around the property while Silas dismounted with deliberate slowness, surveying the well like a general assessing strategic territory. "Impressive work," Silas said. 22 feet by hand, that's determination. It's survival. Brock positioned himself between Silas and the cabin where Serafina was inside with Clara. "What do you want?" "Same thing I've always wanted, this land. But now I'm willing to pay what it's actually worth." He named a figure 3 times his previous offer. "That's more money than most men see in a lifetime, Brock. Enough to buy a nice property somewhere easier. Set your family up properly." "Not selling." "Don't answer yet. Think about what that money means. Real security. Access to doctors for your daughter. A life where your wife doesn't have to work herself to exhaustion just to survive." Silas's expression hardened slightly. "The well was clever, I'll grant you that. But it doesn't solve your fundamental problem." "Which is?" "You're still 2 people trying to run an operation that requires 6. Still isolated, still vulnerable, still one disaster away from losing everything." Silas gestured toward the men he'd brought. "I'm expanding my holdings across Black Ridge, consolidating properties into something sustainable. You can be part of that transition willingly, or you can watch everyone around you sell while your land becomes an island surrounded by my territory." Sounds like a threat. It's reality. 5 more families sold to me this week. By summer, I'll control everything from Cedar Falls to the North Ridge. Silas stepped closer. "Be reasonable. Your well doesn't change the fact that you're outnumbered and out-resourced. Take the money while I'm still offering it." Before Brock could respond, the cabin door opened. Serafina emerged with Clara wrapped against her chest, a rifle held casually in her free hand. Not pointed at anyone, but definitely visible. "My husband said we're not selling," she called out. "That means this conversation's over." One of Silas's men took a step toward her. Brock moved instantly, placing himself in the path, and the man stopped. Tension crackled across the clearing like electricity before a storm. "Mrs. Maddox," Silas said carefully, "I understand you're protective of what you've built, but bringing a weapon into a business discussion is unnecessary." "Is it?" Serafina's gaze swept over the 4 strangers. "You brought 4 armed men to intimidate us. I'm simply balancing the equation." Silas studied her for a long moment, then smiled without warmth. "You're as formidable as people say. I respect that. But respect doesn't change economics or geography, or the fact that stubbornness eventually breaks against reality." "Then I guess we'll find out what breaks first," Serafina said. The standoff held for several heartbeats. Then Silas nodded to his men, and they mounted up. Before leaving, he turned back one final time. "I tried reasonable. Remember that." He rode away, his men following in formation that suggested military training more than ranch work. After they disappeared down the trail, Brock took the rifle from Serafina's trembling hands. She'd maintained perfect composure during the confrontation, but now reaction set in. "Those weren't cowboys," she said quietly. "No, they weren't." "What do you think he'll do?" "Nothing legal." Brock secured the rifle, checked that Clara was sleeping peacefully despite the tension. Silas built his empire by pushing people off land they couldn't defend, usually through financial pressure, sometimes through less civilized methods. We can defend this place. Against 4 professionals and whatever else he can hire? Brock shook his head. We're not gunslingers, Serafina. We're just trying to survive. Then what do? We get help. Make alliances with whoever's left. Show Silas that taking this land will cost more than it's worth. They rode to neighboring properties that afternoon, Clara bundled against the spring chill. Most of their former neighbors had already sold and moved on, leaving empty homesteads that looked haunted in the fading light. But they found 3 families still holding on: the Johnsons, the Petersons, and old Henrik Olafsson, who'd been on the mountain longer than anyone. The Johnsons were barely surviving. Their spring had failed completely, and they'd been buying water at prices that bled them dry. The Petersons had lost so much livestock they were considering selling just to recoup something. Henrik was stubborn as stone but nearly 70, with no children to inherit and failing health that made every day a struggle. Brock gathered them at his cabin and laid out the situation plainly. Silas is consolidating, buying up everything he can, probably forcing out what he can't buy. He came at me today with muscle, not just money. Brock looked around the small group. Alone, we're easy targets. Together, we might stand a chance. Stand a chance against what exactly? Johnson asked. The man's got resources we can't match. Resources aren't everything. He can buy men, but he can't buy determination or knowledge of this terrain. Brock gestured toward Henrik. How long you been on Black Ridge? 43 years come June. You know places to hide, ways to move, paths that don't show on any map. The Petersons know livestock better than anyone. Johnsons know timber work. Serafina knows horses. He met each person's gaze. We've got skills Silas can't buy, and desperation he can't match. We use that. Use it how? Peterson asked. We going to fight him? If necessary, but first we make it clear that taking our land means war, and war is expensive. Profitable men don't like expensive conflicts. Serafina stepped forward, Clara asleep in her sling. We share the well. Free water for any family that stands with us. We coordinate watches, share information, defend each other's property like it's our own. That's asking a lot, Johnson's wife said quietly. We've got kids to think about. So do we. Serafina touched Clara's head. But running means Silas wins, and men like him don't stop at one victory. Today it's Black Ridge. Tomorrow it's whatever valley you relocate to. Eventually you run out of places to run. The families exchanged glances, weighing fear against principle. Finally, Henrik spoke. I'm too old to start over somewhere else. This mountain's been home since before most of you were born. I'll stand. He looked at Brock. But I want to be clear. If this goes bad, if people die because we chose fighting over selling, that weight sits on all of us. Agreed, Brock said. One by one, the others nodded. Not enthusiastically, not without reservation, but with the grim determination of people who'd chosen hard over easy so many times that quitting felt like betraying themselves. They organized patrols, established signals for danger, and created supply caches hidden across the mountain. Brock taught them defensive positions using terrain to compensate for numbers. Serafina worked with the women on emergency protocols for getting children to safety. Henrik shared knowledge accumulated over decades, hidden trails, natural fortifications, places where 10 could hold off 50 if positioned right. The preparation felt excessive until the first incident. 2 weeks after their meeting, the Johnsons' barn burned down. No clear cause, no evidence of accelerant, but the timing was suspicious. They just moved their remaining livestock inside for shelter during a late spring snow. The fire destroyed everything: animals, equipment, winter hay stores. The family survived only because Johnson had been checking a fence line when it started and saw the smoke in time to get his wife and children out. Brock and Serafina rode over immediately. The barn was still smoking, the smell of burned flesh making Clara fuss in her sling. Johnson stood amid the ruins, his face a mask of devastation. It was deliberate, he said flatly. I checked the stove before bed like always. Nothing was burning, and the doors were barred from outside when I got back. Someone locked my animals in and lit it up. You see anyone? No. But I found this. He held out a piece of paper weighted with a rock, left conspicuously near the road. It listed a purchase price for the Johnson property, lower than Silas's previous offer, but available immediately. He's escalating, Serafina said quietly. More than that. He's sending a message. Brock studied the ruins. Anything you can't replace or rebuild? All of it, Johnson's voice cracked. We're done, Brock. I can't rebuild with no money and no stock. Can't feed my kids on pride. So you're selling? What choice do I have? Anger and despair fought across Johnson's features. My daughter's 6 years old. She watched her favorite calf burn to death tonight because her father thought he could stand against a man with unlimited resources. You tell me what choice that leaves. Brock had no answer. They helped the Johnsons salvage what they could, but by week's end, the family had sold to Silas and moved to Cedar Falls. One alliance down. The Petersons lasted another month before their remaining cattle contracted some mysterious illness that killed half the herd in 3 days. When the surviving animals were examined, they'd been poisoned, something introduced to their water supply that was subtle enough to seem natural, but targeted enough to be deliberate. I can't prove it was Silas, Peterson said when he came to tell Brock he was selling, but I know. And knowing doesn't change that we're ruined. I've got 2 sons who need futures, and those futures aren't on poisoned land. If you sell, he wins. He already won. We're just deciding how much we lose before admitting it. Peterson gripped Brock's shoulder. I respect what you're doing, I do. But some fights aren't worth the cost, and I've reached my limit. That left only Henrik, Brock, and Serafina. 3 properties in Silas's growing empire, holding out through increasingly aggressive pressure. The old Norwegian refused to buckle. Let him come, Henrik said when they met to discuss their shrinking alliance. I've survived worse than Silas Crow. Mining accidents, claim jumpers, winters that would kill you just for looking at them wrong. I'm not scared of some businessman playing at being a cattle baron. But Henrik's defiance couldn't change his age or health. In early June, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. His niece came from Denver to care for him, took one look at the situation, and made arrangements to move him to town where he could receive proper treatment. He's furious, she told Brock and Serafina when they came to visit. Keeps saying he won't let Silas have the satisfaction. But he can barely walk, can't work, can't defend himself. Pride doesn't feed people or cure illness. They stood at Henrik's bedside in his cabin, a place that had survived 4 decades of mountain brutality but was now being claimed by simple biology. The old man's eyes tracked them, frustration burning in his gaze, but the words wouldn't come right anymore. It's all right, Brock told him. You fought long enough. Nobody can ask more. Henrik's good hand gripped Brock's wrist with surprising strength. He managed 2 words through the paralysis. Don't quit. We won't, Serafina promised. Henrik's property sold the following week. His niece got a fair price, actually fair, not the depressed values Silas had been offering others. A gesture that felt like the man celebrating victory by being gracious to the defeated, which left Brock and Serafina alone. The isolation felt different now. Not the peaceful solitude Brock had once sought, but the exposed vulnerability of being surrounded by hostile territory. Silas owned everything around them, every neighboring property, every access road except the main trail to Cedar Falls, every water source but their well. They were an island in his ocean, and he was patient enough to wait for them to drown. We should talk about this rationally, Serafina said one evening. They sat outside watching Clara, now 4 months old and growing stronger daily, attempt to roll over on a blanket. Without pride or stubbornness, just practical assessment. All right, we're alone. We have one well, limited supplies, no allies, and a daughter who deserves better than living in a war zone. She kept her voice even, clinical. Silas can wait us out, bleed us slowly, make life increasingly impossible until we have no choice but to sell. I know. So why are we still here? The question wasn't accusatory, just genuine. What are we actually fighting for at this point? Brock watched Clara's determined efforts to move, her tiny face scrunched with concentration. Principle, maybe. The idea that people like Silas don't get to win just because they're willing to be more ruthless than everyone else. Principle doesn't feed our daughter. No. But teaching her to surrender every time someone powerful pushes back doesn't either. He turned to Serafina. You remember what you told me when Clara was born? That you wanted her born to parents who fought, not parents who quit? I remember. I also remember nearly dying and wondering if my pride was worth orphaning my child. So you think we should sell? She was quiet for a long time, watching Clara finally succeed in rolling onto her stomach and immediately protest the accomplishment. I think we should decide together what we're willing to sacrifice and what we're not. I think we should be honest about our chances and our limits. And I think we should remember that surviving isn't the same as winning, but it's not the same as losing either. That's not an answer, because I don't have one. She met his gaze. 6 months ago, I would have said we fight no matter what. But 6 months ago, Clara wasn't real. She was potential. Now she's a person who depends on us making smart decisions, not just brave ones. They sat in silence as evening settled across Black Ridge. The land they'd fought so hard to keep looked beautiful in the fading light. Mountains rolling toward horizons, valleys thick with summer growth, sky that went on forever. It was worth fighting for. But was it worth dying for? Worth risking their daughter for? The answer came 3 nights later, delivered with fire and violence. Brock woke to smoke and Clara's screaming. He rolled from bed to find the cabin filling with thick smoke, orange light flickering beyond the windows. Serafina was already moving, wrapping Clara in blankets, heading for the door. They burst outside to find the barn fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping hands. "The horses!" Serafina gasped. Brock ran toward the barn despite the heat. The doors were barred from outside, same as the Johnsons had been. He tore them open, and horses bolted past him, wild with terror. He counted heads through the chaos. All 6 animals made it out. But the barn itself was gone, and the fire was spreading toward the woodshed. They fought it through the night, Serafina working beside him while Clara screamed from her basket near the well. They managed to save the cabin and most of the outbuildings, but the barn was a total loss. By dawn, they stood exhausted and soot-covered, staring at smoking ruins that looked sickeningly familiar. "This is how it ends," Serafina said quietly, "not with negotiation or legal pressure. With fire in the night until we give up or die." Brock found the same weighted note Johnson had received. Same format, same message. An offer lower than before, available immediately. Accept or face worse. "We go to the law," he said. "This is arson. Criminal." "The law?" Serafina laughed bitterly. "Brock, the sheriff is Silas's cousin. The town council is people who've sold to him or want to. Who exactly do you think will enforce justice against the richest man in the territory?" She was right. They both knew it. Frontier justice favored those with resources, and Silas had systematically positioned himself as the region's primary power. Reporting the fire would accomplish nothing except showing weakness. "Then what?" Brock demanded. "We wait for the next fire? The next poisoning? Let him escalate until one of us is dead?" "No. We do what people without power have always done." Her gaze hardened. "We make him hurt worse than he's hurting us." Over the next week, they planned carefully. Silas's strength was his consolidated holdings and resources. His weakness was the same. Everything tied to specific properties with specific vulnerabilities. If his cattle needed water, his timber needed protection, his infrastructure needed maintenance, then disrupting those needs would cost him money and time. They started small. Fence lines mysteriously failed on Silas's eastern property, letting cattle wander onto federal land where retrieving them was expensive and time-consuming. Equipment left in fields overnight developed problems. Broken axles, fouled engines, missing parts. Water troughs mysteriously contaminated with harmless but foul-tasting minerals that made livestock refuse to drink. Nothing violent, nothing that directly harmed animals or people. But each incident cost Silas money and credibility, made his operation look disorganized and poorly managed. His response was predictably aggressive. More fires attempted, more subtle poisonings, more pressure applied to their shrinking resources. But Brock and Serafina had learned to be careful, to watch constantly, to sleep in shifts with weapons close. They'd become guerrilla fighters in a war they'd never wanted, defending land that felt less like home and more like a battlefield. "This is insane," Serafina said after they'd foiled another arson attempt. "We're living like soldiers. You want to stop?" "I want this to be over, one way or another." She adjusted Clara, now sleeping through chaos that would terrify most infants. "But I don't know how it ends except with someone getting killed." The answer came from an unexpected direction. Martha Hendricks appeared at their cabin one afternoon, riding alone and looking uncomfortable. She'd been one of Serafina's earliest critics in Cedar Falls, a pillar of conventional morality who'd considered the mountain bride scandalous and improper. "Mrs. Maddox," Martha said stiffly, "may I speak with you?" Serafina gestured her inside, curious and wary. Martha accepted tea with trembling hands, clearly struggling with something. "I've come to apologize," she finally said, "and to warn you." "Warn us about what?" "Silas Crow. He's planning something larger than burned barns or poisoned cattle." Martha set her cup down. "My husband does business with him. I've overheard conversations. Silas is bringing in serious men, not ranch hands, not intimidators, real violence professionals." "To do what?" "To remove you, permanently, if necessary." Martha's voice shook. "He's tired of your resistance. He thinks you've made him look weak, and he can't tolerate that. So he's planning something that will either force you off this mountain or end the situation conclusively." "Why tell us this?" Serafina asked. "You've never been our friend." "No, I haven't. I judged you unfairly from the start, decided you were improper and inappropriate." Martha met her gaze. "But I was wrong. You've proven yourself stronger and more principled than anyone I know, and what Silas is planning, it's murder. I can't be party to that, even by silence." "When?" "Within the week. That's all I know." After Martha left, Brock and Serafina faced their darkest choice yet. They could run, pack what they could carry, abandon the property, disappear before Silas's hired killers arrived. They'd lose everything, but they'd live. Or they could fight, knowing the odds were stacked impossibly against them. "If we run, he wins," Brock said. "If we fight, we might die. Clara might be orphaned." Serafina's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "I keep trying to find the brave choice, the principled choice, but all I see are different ways to fail her. Maybe there's no good choice. Maybe there's just the choice we can live with." They looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, innocent of the violence circling her family. She deserved parents who protected her, who made smart decisions based on her welfare rather than pride. But she also deserved parents who stood for something, who didn't teach her that power always wins and resistance is futile. "I can't run," Serafina admitted. "I've tried being that person, choosing safety over principle. It nearly destroyed me." "I can't either," Brock said. "This land, it's more than property. It's proof that someone like me can build something lasting, that outcasts and misfits can carve out space in a world that doesn't want them." They held each other in the fading light, holding their daughter between them, knowing they'd chosen the dangerous path and hoping desperately it wouldn't cost Clara everything. The attack came 4 nights later, announced by torches and gunfire and men who'd been paid enough not to care about justice or mercy. Brock was on watch when he saw the first torch emerge from the tree line, then another, then 6 more, spreading in a coordinated pattern that spoke of military training rather than ranch work. His stomach turned to ice. "Serafina," he called quietly into the cabin. "They're here." She appeared instantly, rifle in hand, Clara bundled in a leather carrier strapped to her back. They'd prepared for this. Had a plan. Had positions. Had escape routes mapped. But seeing actual torches advancing through darkness made all their preparation feel desperately inadequate. "How many?" Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. 8 that I can see. Could be more. They'll burn everything, probably. But we're not in the buildings when they do." Brock grabbed the pack they'd prepared, stuffed with essentials and Clara's supplies. "You remember the plan? I take Clara to the cave. You hold them here long enough for us to get clear, then follow the northern trail." She gripped his arm. "Brock, if something happens, nothing's happening. We stick to the plan. Stick to." The torchbearers were close enough now that Brock could make out faces. Hard men, professionals, spreading out to surround the property. In the center rode Silas Crow himself, mounted on a gray horse, watching his hired violence with the detached interest of someone who'd paid for a service and expected results. Brock stepped into the open, his massive frame illuminated by the cabin's lamplight. The approaching men stopped, clearly not expecting confrontation. "That's far enough," Brock called out. Silas urged his horse forward. "Brock Maddox, I'd hoped you'd be reasonable, but I suppose some men need object lessons in reality. You're trespassing. Turn around and leave." "Or what? You'll stop all of us?" Silas's smile was cold amusement. I've been patient, offered fair prices, tried negotiation, even tolerated your little acts of sabotage. But patience has limits, and mine expired when you cost me a timber contract because my equipment kept mysteriously failing. Don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Silas gestured to his men. These gentlemen are here to deliver a final message. You have 1 hour to gather whatever you can carry and leave Black Ridge forever. After that, everything burns. If you're still here, you burn with it. We're not leaving. Then you're a fool and a terrible father. Silas's gaze swept the cabin. I know your wife and child are in there. I know you've packed supplies like you're planning some heroic last stand, but heroism doesn't stop fire, Brock. It just gets people killed. Brock's hands clenched. Every instinct screamed to charge forward, to use his size and strength to tear through these hired thugs. But Silas had positioned his men well, too spread out to rush, too many to fight, all armed and clearly experienced. 1 hour, Silas repeated. Then we torch everything, starting with the cabin. Choose wisely. They retreated slightly, forming a perimeter that penned Brock and his family in. Torches flickered in the darkness like malevolent fireflies. Brock backed toward the cabin, mind racing. Inside, Serafina had already moved Clara to the root cellar, a hidden space beneath the kitchen they'd expanded and stocked for exactly this scenario. The entrance was concealed under a heavy rug and reinforced trap door. Not perfect, but better than nothing. An hour, Brock said. Then they burn us out. The cellar won't protect us from fire. No, but it'll hide you long enough for them to think we ran. He knelt beside the opening. You stay down there quiet. Don't come out until morning, no matter what you hear. And where will you be? Drawing them away, making them think we fled north. He gripped her shoulders. They want to see us run. I'll give them that. Lead them on a chase while you and Clara stay hidden. That's suicide. You can't outrun 8 men through terrain they can track. I can try. He pulled her close, kissed her hard. Henrik showed me places even locals don't know. I get to those. I can disappear. Brock, this is the only way we all survive. I lead them off, you stay hidden with Clara, and tomorrow when they're gone, you take what you can and get to Cedar Falls. Martha Hendricks will help you. Serafina's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I won't leave you. You will. For Clara. He touched their daughter's sleeping face. She needs her mother. She needs someone who'll fight for her, raise her strong, teach her that bastards like Silas don't always win. She needs her father too. Maybe. But if it's a choice between both parents dead or one parent alive, the math is simple. He kissed Clara's forehead, breathing in her infant smell, memorizing the weight of her in his arms. Then he handed her to Serafina. I love you both. Remember that. Brock, please, get in the cellar, now. She descended the ladder with Clara clutched to her chest, her face a mask of devastation and rage. Brock lowered the trap door, replaced the rug, and scattered furniture to make the room look hastily abandoned. Then he grabbed his rifle, stuffed his pockets with ammunition, and prepared to become the most visible target possible. He burst from the cabin at a run, heading north toward the trails Henrik had shown him. Behind him, shouts erupted. Torches shifted, following his movement. Gunfire cracked through the night, bullets whining past his head. He ran harder, using his long stride to eat ground, crashing through brush with enough noise that they couldn't miss his direction. The chase was on. Brock knew these trails better than any hired gun from Denver or Salt Lake, but not well enough to navigate them blind in darkness while being shot at. He stumbled over roots, crashed through branches, felt his shoulder tear open on something sharp. Blood ran warm down his arm, but he kept moving. Behind him, the pursuit closed in. These men were professionals. They knew how to track, how to coordinate, how to herd prey toward predetermined kill zones. Brock realized too late that he was being funneled toward a narrow canyon with limited exits. He changed direction abruptly, diving into thick underbrush that tore at his clothes and skin. Circled back toward an outcropping Henrik had called the Devil's Thumb, a rock formation with a cave system that went deep into the mountain. If he could reach it, he might lose them in the tunnels. A bullet caught him in the leg. The impact spun him sideways, and he crashed into rocks with bone-jarring force. Pain exploded through his thigh, hot and immediate. He scrambled into cover, pressing his hand against the wound. The bullet had gone through, which was good, but he was bleeding heavily and couldn't run anymore. Torchlight flickered closer. Voices called to each other, coordinating positions. Brock levered himself behind a boulder, raised his rifle, and fired toward the nearest torch. The light dropped, and someone screamed. He worked the bolt, fired again, heard another curse. "He's armed!" someone shouted. "Careful approach!" Brock used the pause to tear a strip from his shirt, wrap it tight around his bleeding leg. The pain was savage but manageable. He'd been hurt worse. At least that's what he told himself while his vision swam and nausea threatened to overwhelm him. More gunfire erupted, chips of stone exploding around him. He returned fire methodically, making each shot count, trying to create the impression of a fortified position rather than a bleeding man hiding behind rocks. The attackers held back, apparently unwilling to charge a position that might have multiple armed defenders. "Brock Maddox," Silas's voice carried through the darkness. "You're bleeding out behind that rock. We can wait all night while you weaken, or you can surrender and receive medical attention." "Go to hell!" Defiant to the end. "I respect that truly, but it changes nothing." A pause. "Where's your family, Brock?" "We searched the cabin, found it empty. Did they run while you played hero, or are they hiding somewhere close, waiting for you to save them?" Brock's blood ran cold. If they'd searched the cabin, they'd been inside. Had they found the cellar? He strained to hear anything from that direction, but heard only his own ragged breathing and the crackle of approaching torches. "Nothing to say?" Silas sounded amused. "I'll make you a deal. Tell me where they are, and I'll let them go unharmed. You have my word." "Your word's worthless." "Perhaps, but it's the only offer you're getting." Silas's tone hardened. "I'll find them regardless. Question is whether you die knowing they'll be discovered eventually, or whether you at least try to bargain for their safety." Brock raised up slightly, fired toward Silas's voice. The shot went wide, but it made his position clear. Immediately, concentrated fire erupted from 3 directions. He dropped back behind cover as bullets chewed into stone around him. His leg was going numb, blood loss probably, combined with shock and exhaustion. He led them away from Serafina and Clara, giving them time to stay hidden. But he was running out of ammunition and consciousness, and these men weren't going anywhere. A new sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Brock's heart sank. Reinforcements. Silas had brought even more men than he'd shown initially, but the gunfire that erupted wasn't aimed at Brock. Riders burst from the tree line, scattering Silas's hired men. In the chaos and muzzle flash, Brock recognized faces from Cedar Falls. Shopkeepers, farmers, people he'd nodded to in passing but never considered friends. Leading them was Martha Hendricks, of all people, holding a rifle with surprising competence. "Federal marshals in Cedar Falls," Martha shouted. "Anyone still fighting when he arrives gets charged with attempted murder." The hired guns scattered. They'd been paid to intimidate and burn, not face legal consequences. Within minutes, the clearing was empty except for bodies. 2 men Brock had shot, and 1 who'd been trampled in the retreat. Martha dismounted, approached Brock's position carefully. "You hit?" "Leg. I'll live." He struggled to stand, failed. "My family in the cellar under your cabin, if Serafina followed her own plan. We passed your place on the way up. Nothing's burned yet." "How did you know where to find you?" Martha helped him bind his leg properly. "I've lived in these mountains 30 years, Brock. Knew you'd run for Henrik's old trails if you were trying to lose pursuers. Also knew you'd never actually abandon your family, so I figured you were buying time." Other riders approached, men Brock recognized from town, but had never spoken to at length. They looked uncomfortable, but determined. "We couldn't let it stand," one said. "Silas burning people out, hiring killers, that's not how things should work." "The marshal really coming?" Brock asked. "Sent for him 2 days ago when we heard Silas's plans." Martha stood, brushed dirt from her skirt. "He's at my place now, gathering testimony. Turns out a lot of people sold their land under duress and are willing to say so officially. Silas will buy his way out." "Maybe, but attempted murder witnessed by a dozen townspeople is harder to ignore than property disputes." She offered her hand. "Can you ride?" Brock let them help him onto a horse, every movement agony through his wounded leg. They rode back toward his cabin in a group, torches now symbols of protection rather than threat. As they crested the final rise, Brock saw his property intact. Buildings standing, no fresh fires, everything exactly as he'd left it. He practically fell from the horse, limped toward the cabin. Inside, he tore up the rug, yanked open the trap door. "Serafina! It's me! It's safe!" Her face appeared in the opening, tear-streaked and fierce. Clara was crying in her arms, the sound the most beautiful thing Brock had ever heard. "You're alive!" Serafina gasped. "So are you." He helped them up, pulled both into his arms, and felt the terror of the last hours finally break loose. He shook against them, all the fear he'd suppressed flooding out at once. Clara screamed her displeasure at being squashed between her parents, and they broke apart laughing despite everything. Martha appeared in the doorway with several townspeople, all politely averting their eyes from the family reunion. "Marshall wants statements from both of you," Martha said. "But that can wait until morning. Tonight, you should rest." "What about Silas?" "Rode off when my people arrived. He's not stupid enough to stick around when the law's involved." Martha's expression was grim. "But he's also not finished. Men like him don't surrender because of one setback." She was right, and Brock knew it. They'd survived the night, but the war wasn't over. Silas had too much invested in Black Ridge to simply accept defeat. He'd regroup, find new approaches, apply pressure through channels they hadn't anticipated. Over the next week, the situation clarified in unexpected ways. The federal marshal, a lean man named Garrett with eyes that missed nothing, collected testimony from everyone Silas had pressured or threatened. The burned barns, the poisoned cattle, the intimidation tactics, all of it documented officially. But Silas had been careful. Nothing tied directly to him. His hired men were gone, scattered to territories where warrants meant nothing. The worst charges the marshal could make stick were property disputes and business interference, civil matters, not criminal. "He'll pay fines," Garrett explained, "probably lose some land and settlements, but he won't see jail time unless someone testifies he directly ordered violence." "What about the men he hired?" Brock asked. "Gone. And even if we found them, their testimony would be worth nothing. Hired guns don't make credible witnesses." Garrett shook his head. "I'm sorry. Frontier justice favors those who can afford better criminals." The legal battle dragged through summer. Families who'd sold under pressure filed to reclaim their land. Silas fought every claim with expensive lawyers and political connections. Some cases succeeded, most didn't. The mountain community fractured into factions, those who'd stood against Silas, those who'd sold to him, and those trying to navigate between both groups. Through it all, Brock and Serafina rebuilt. The barn went up again, better designed this time. They restocked livestock carefully, diversified their holdings to reduce vulnerability. Clara grew from infant to baby who could sit up, babble, and reach for everything with determined hands. The town's attitude shifted gradually. Women who'd once mocked Serafina for being unladylike now sought her advice on everything from horse training to standing up to difficult husbands. Men who'd considered Brock too different began treating him as someone who'd earned respect through stubborn refusal to break. Martha Hendricks became an unlikely friend, visiting regularly with supplies and gossip. "You've changed things," Martha said one afternoon while watching Serafina teach Clara to pet a gentle mare. "Made people question assumptions about what women can do, what outsiders can accomplish, what's possible when you refuse conventional limits." "Didn't mean to change anything," Serafina said. "Just tried to survive." "Sometimes that's enough." Martha smiled. "Sometimes survival is revolution." But Silas wasn't finished. In late August, a lawyer arrived with documents claiming Brock's well-violated water rights that belonged to Silas through his neighboring properties. The legal argument was complex, something about historical agreements and territorial water law, but the intent was clear. If Silas couldn't force them off through violence or intimidation, he'd use courts to make their position untenable. "Can he actually do this?" Serafina demanded, reading through the filing. "Maybe," the lawyer they'd hired admitted. "Water rights are complicated. His claim has some precedent, especially if he can prove historical usage. The well didn't exist until we dug it. How can he claim historical rights? Because the water underneath might flow through his properties. If he can demonstrate that your well depletes his sources, he has grounds to restrict your usage." The trial was set for October. Everything hung in balance again, not through fire and bullets this time, but through paperwork and legal arguments. Brock found it almost worse. At least violence was honest. This felt like being strangled by procedures designed to favor those who could afford better representation. They prepared desperately, gathering evidence of their well's independence, documenting water levels on Silas's properties before and after their well's creation, hiring engineers to testify about underground water flow. The costs mounted dangerously, eating through reserves they'd rebuilt. "We can't afford to lose," Brock said, reviewing their finances. "Legal fees are bleeding us dry. If the court rules against us—"
"Then we fight it," Serafina interrupted. "Appeal, delay, find another angle. We've come too far to quit because of courtroom tactics." The night before the trial, Silas himself appeared at their door. Alone this time, hands visible and empty, approaching like a man seeking parley rather than conflict. "May I come in?" he asked. Brock almost refused, but curiosity won. They sat at the table while Clara played on the floor, Serafina's rifle within easy reach despite the peaceful setting.
"I'm here to offer settlement," Silas said bluntly. "Drop your opposition to my consolidation efforts, sell me water rights to your well, and I'll withdraw the lawsuit and pay you yearly lease fees that exceed what you'd make ranching." "You mean surrender. I mean compromise. You keep your property, I get water access. We both avoid expensive legal battles with uncertain outcomes." Silas leaned back. "I've underestimated you repeatedly, Brock. Thought you'd break easily. Thought your wife was just stubborn pride. Thought one hard winter would finish you. I was wrong every time. So why keep fighting? Because I don't like leaving things unfinished. Because your resistance has cost me money and credibility. Because every day you hold out, other small operators think they can defy me too." His expression hardened. "But I'm tired of this conflict. It's expensive and increasingly public, so I'm offering you a way out that lets both of us claim victory." "What happens to the families you forced off their land?" "That's not part of this negotiation. It is for me." Brock met his gaze. "You want settlement? Fine. Return the land you acquired through intimidation to its original owners at the prices you paid. Compensate people for destroyed property. Publicly acknowledge what you did." Silas laughed. "You're joking." "Dead serious. Why would I agree to that? I'd lose a fortune and destroy my own reputation. Because the alternative is me winning this lawsuit, then filing criminal charges for everything you've done, then spending every dollar I have making your life as difficult as you've made mine." Brock's voice stayed level. "You want this finished? Those are my terms." "You're bluffing. You can't afford a prolonged fight." "Neither can you. Not really. You've got investors, partners, people who expect returns. How long before they question why you're bleeding money fighting one stubborn rancher?" Serafina joined the conversation. "We've already survived everything you threw at us. We'll survive this too. Question is whether you can afford the cost of victory." Silas studied them both, calculating odds and costs. Finally, he stood. "I'll consider your terms. But don't expect miracles. Some of those properties have been resold, integrated into larger operations. Untangling everything would take years." "Then you'd better start now," Brock said. After Silas left, they sat in silence, wondering if they'd just made a terrible mistake. Demanding full restitution was righteous but possibly foolish. Silas could simply refuse, proceed with the lawsuit, and crush them through legal attrition. But 3 days before trial, a messenger arrived with new documents. Silas was settling, not on Brock's terms exactly, but close enough to matter. He'd return land to families willing to take it back, compensate others who'd moved on, and publicly acknowledge that his expansion had involved questionable tactics. In exchange, Brock and Serafina would drop all legal claims and grant him limited water rights. "It's not everything," Serafina said, reading the terms. "No, but it's something." Brock thought of the families who'd lost homes, the neighbors who'd been driven away. "Some of them can come back now. Henrik maybe, if his health allows. The Petersons mentioned wanting to return if circumstances changed. And we keep our land." "We keep our land," Brock confirmed. They signed the settlement on a crisp October morning in the federal marshal's office with Garrett serving as witness. Silas looked older than Brock remembered, his silver hair touched with more white, his eyes carrying something that might have been respect. "You won," Silas said quietly. "Not the way you wanted, not completely, but more than anyone else has managed. I hope you appreciate what that cost." "I do," Brock replied. "I also hope you learned something about pushing people past their breaking point." "Perhaps." Silas gathered his documents. "Though I suspect we both learned that stubbornness and principle are expensive luxuries in a practical world." After he left, Brock and Serafina walked out into autumn sunshine. Clara rode in Serafina's arms, babbling at everything she saw, reaching toward falling leaves with delighted wonder. "We should celebrate," Serafina said.
How? I don't know. I've never won anything worth celebrating before. She laughed, slightly manic with relief. "We actually did it, Brock. We stood against everything and didn't break. Not quite everything. Winter's coming again. Let it come. We know how to survive winters now." They rode back to Black Ridge together, their property coming into view as they crested the final rise. The land looked the same as when Brock first claimed it, wild and beautiful and impossibly hard. But now it held ghosts of everything they'd fought through. The rebuilt barn, the well that had saved them, the cabin where Clara was born. Every structure carried weight, bore witness to their refusal to surrender. Over the following months, some families returned. Henrik came back briefly before his health failed permanently, spending his final weeks on land he'd defended for decades. The Petersons reclaimed their property, rebuilding with fierce determination. The Johnsons chose to stay in Cedar Falls, but they visited occasionally, their children playing with Clara while adults shared stories of survival. Black Ridge slowly became a community again, knitted together not by proximity, but by shared resistance. They'd all faced Silas's pressure and survived in different ways. Some had sold and returned, some had held out, some had fled and come back. But they'd all made choices under impossible circumstances, and that shared experience created bonds stronger than geography. Serafina found her place in this community not by conforming, but by being exactly who she'd always been. She trained horses for other families, taught riding to children, and became the person women sought when they needed advice about standing firm against husbands or society or their own doubts. Brock discovered that his size and strength mattered less than his willingness to help. He dug wells for neighbors, raised barns, settled disputes through patient mediation. The mountain giant became the mountain's stabilizing force, someone people turned to when problems seemed insurmountable. Clara grew into a toddler who feared nothing, climbed everything, and possessed her mother's stubborn refusal to accept limits. She'd been born in crisis, raised through conflict, and somehow emerged joyful despite everything. Watching her discover the world with fearless curiosity, Brock understood that they'd won something more important than land or legal victories. They'd won the right to define themselves on their own terms, to build a life that defied conventions and expectations, to prove that being different wasn't weakness but strength. Winter came again, as it always did, but this time they faced it with full stores, reliable water, strong buildings, and allies who'd stand with them against whatever came next. The season would be hard. Seasons in the mountains were always hard, but hard wasn't the same as impossible. As snow fell on Black's Ridge, Brock stood outside the cabin watching his family through the window. Serafina was teaching Clara some hand game by the fire, both of them laughing at Clara's clumsy attempts. The sound carried through the cold air, a declaration that joy could exist even in the hardest places, that love could flourish despite impossible odds. He'd come to this mountain seeking solitude and found something infinitely better. A woman who challenged him to be more than his size. A daughter who embodied hope despite brutal circumstances. A community that had chosen principle over comfort. The mountain hadn't broken them. Instead, they'd broken the mountain's reputation for being unconquerable. And that victory, more than any legal settlement or reclaimed land, was worth every moment of struggle they'd endured. Spring arrived 3 years after the settlement, and with it came a visitor Brock never expected to see again. Silas Crow rode up the mountain trail alone, his gray horse moving carefully over ground still muddy from snowmelt. He looked diminished somehow, not physically smaller, but carrying himself with less certainty than before. Brock watched him approach from the porch where he'd been repairing Clara's wooden toys, the 3-year-old playing nearby with a collection of carved animals. "Brock Maddox," Silas called out, stopping a respectful distance away. "I come with a proposal, not a threat. Last proposal you made involved lawyers and water rights. And you beat me. Fairly, I might add." Silas dismounted, moved closer. His gaze fell on Clara, who stared at him with the unblinking suspicion of children who sense tension in adults. "Your daughter's grown." "They do that." Brock set aside the toy he'd been sanding. "What do you want, Silas?" "To offer you a job. Partnership, actually." He pulled documents from his saddlebag. "I'm expanding into livestock trading, buying stock from mountain ranchers, selling to railheads and eastern markets.
It's profitable, but it requires someone who knows the territory, knows the people, someone they'd actually trust. And you think that's me? I think you're the only man on Black Ridge who's proven he can't be pushed around or bought off. The families who came back, they listened to you. They trust your word. Silas spread the papers on the porch rail. I'm offering 20% of profits, decision-making authority over purchases, full autonomy in how you run operations. Brock scanned the contract without touching it. The terms were generous, suspiciously so. Why? Because I'm tired of fighting over scraps when there's real money to be made in cooperation. Silas met his gaze. I underestimated you, tried to crush you, and failed. That failure taught me something. Some people can't be defeated, only partnered with. You've got integrity and connections I can't replicate. I've got capital and market access you need. Together we could build something substantial. Or you could be setting me up for another legal trap. Read the contract. Have your lawyer review it. I'm offering legitimate partnership because fighting you costs more than working with you. Silas's expression held something like regret. I've made a lot of enemies building my holdings, Brock. Turns out that's expensive in ways that don't show on ledgers. People don't trust me, don't want to work with me unless forced. But they trust you. Before Brock could respond, Serafina emerged from the barn, leading a young mare she'd been training. She stopped when she saw Silas, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle she no longer carried constantly. Mrs. Maddox, Silas nodded respectfully. You're looking well. Can't say the same. You look like a man with an agenda. She tied the mare, moved to stand beside Brock. What's he offering? Partnership in livestock trading, 20% profits. And in exchange? My reputation, apparently. Brock gestured at the papers. He needs someone people trust. Serafina studied Silas with the same assessing gaze she turned on horses, looking for tells, for signs of deception or honest intent. You tried to burn us out, hired men to kill my husband, spent 2 years making our lives hell. Now you want to be partners? I want to stop fighting a war that's costing us both. Silas's voice carried genuine weariness. I was wrong about many things, Mrs. Maddox. Wrong to think force was cheaper than negotiation. Wrong to assume stubborn people would eventually break. Wrong to believe my money could solve every problem. He turned back to Brock. I'm offering amends in the only way I know how, through business that benefits us both. We don't need your money, Serafina said flatly. No, you've proven that. But you could use market connections, transportation infrastructure, financial backing for expansion. Silas picked up his papers. Think about it. Talk it over. The offer stands regardless of how long you take to decide. After he left, Brock and Serafina sat on the porch steps while Clara chased chickens across the yard. The contract sat between them like something alive and dangerous. It's a good offer, Brock said finally. Financially, strategically, it makes sense. So does poison if you're desperate enough to drink it. You think it's a trap? I think Silas Crow doesn't make generous offers without calculating how they benefit him more than us. She picked up the papers, scanned them with narrowed eyes. But I also think he's telling the truth about needing someone people trust. His reputation's damaged. People remember what he did. So do we. Yeah. She set the contract down. But remember what Martha said? Sometimes survival is revolution. Maybe working with Silas, making him accountable through partnership rather than opposition. Maybe that's how we ensure he doesn't go back to his old methods. Brock considered this. The idea of partnering with the man who'd tried to destroy them felt wrong on every level. But Serafina had a point. Keeping Silas close, having authority over his livestock operations, building financial ties that made violence counterproductive, that might accomplish more than continued antagonism. We'd need protections, he said. Legal guarantees, exit clauses, authority to walk away if he violates terms, and transparency. Full access to books, veto power over questionable deals, profit sharing that's verified by independent auditors. They spent the next week consulting with their lawyer, revising terms, building safeguards into every clause. When they finally signed the partnership agreement, it was a document that bound Silas to ethical behavior through financial consequences rather than moral appeals. The first year proved surprisingly successful. Brock's reputation opened doors across Black Ridge and beyond. Ranchers who would have refused deals with Silas alone trusted Brock's judgment on fair prices and honest transactions. The operation grew steadily, generating profits that Brock funneled back into community improvements, better roads, a schoolhouse, emergency medical supplies cached across the mountain. But success brought new tensions. Some families thought Brock had sold out, partnered with the enemy for money. Others resented that he'd gotten wealthy while they still struggled. The unity forged through shared resistance to Silas began fracturing under the weight of prosperity and changing circumstances. One evening, Peterson cornered Brock at the general store in Cedar Falls. The man looked older, worn down by years of hard ranching, his hands gnarled from work. "You've changed," Peterson said bluntly. "Used to be one of us. Now you're Silas Crow's partner, making more in a month than most of us see in a year." Partnership doesn't mean I've forgotten where I came from, doesn't it? You live better, dress better, send your daughter to that fancy school in Denver for the summer. That's not the life of a mountain rancher anymore, Brock. That's something else. The accusation stung because it carried truth. The partnership had brought money, and money had brought changes. Not extravagant wealth, but comfort they'd never known. Serafina could afford proper riding equipment instead of making do with repaired tack. Clara had opportunities, education, exposure to culture beyond the frontier, choices that most mountain children never glimpsed. "I'm still the same person," Brock said. "Are you? Or did success do what Silas's violence couldn't, change you into something that fits his world instead of ours?" Brock had no immediate answer. That night, he and Serafina talked until dawn, wrestling with questions about identity and integrity and whether prosperity inevitably meant compromise. "Peterson's not entirely wrong," Serafina admitted. "We are different. We have options now that we didn't before. Claire's growing up with advantages I never dreamed of." "That's bad?" "It's complicated. We fought for the right to build our own life, to reject conventional limits. But now we're building a life that looks suspiciously conventional. Business partnerships, financial success, social respectability." She stared at the fire. "Sometimes I wonder if we won the battle but lost the war. If we survived Silas's attacks only to become more like him." "We're nothing like Silas, aren't we? We're using money and influence to get what we want. We're making decisions that benefit us while others struggle. We've got power now, Brock. Question is what we do with it." The question haunted them through that summer and into fall. Then came an incident that crystallized everything. A young couple named the Hendersons, no relation to Martha, arrived on Black Ridge with nothing but determination and a worn wagon. They claimed land adjacent to Silas's eastern holdings and started building. Within months, they faced the same pressure Brock and Serafina had endured years earlier. Not from Silas directly this time, but from his ranch foreman who saw an opportunity to expand his boss's territory. The foreman used familiar tactics: intimidation, sabotage, pressure, designed to break resolve. The Hendersons came to Brock for help, their faces carrying the same desperate hope Brock remembered from his own darkest days. "We heard what you did," Henderson said, "how you stood against Silas and won. We thought maybe you'd stand with us." Brock looked at this young couple, 22 at most, full of naive courage, probably doomed without intervention. Helping them meant confronting Silas, potentially destroying the partnership, sacrificing financial security for principle. "I'll talk to Silas," he said. The confrontation happened in Silas's ranch office, a room that reeked of money and leather and cigars. Silas listened to Brock's concerns with neutral expression, then shook his head. "I didn't authorize any pressure on the Hendersons. That's my foreman acting independently." "Then stop him." "It's complicated. He's protecting my interests as he understands them. If I undercut his authority, it looks weak. And if you let him continue, our partnership is over." Brock stood. "I meant what I agreed to. Honest business. No intimidation. No going back to your old methods. Your foreman is using those methods. Stop him, or I walk." Silas studied him for a long moment. "You'd sacrifice 20% of a profitable operation over a couple of homesteaders you don't even know?" "Yeah, I would." "Why? Principle, nostalgia, some misguided sense of solidarity with struggling farmers? Because the whole point of everything we fought for was proving that people like you don't get to crush people like them." Brock's voice hardened. "We partnered because I thought you'd learned something. If you haven't, then this whole thing is a waste of time." Silas leaned back in his chair, calculating odds and consequences. Finally, he nodded. I'll handle the foreman. The Hendersons can stay unmolested. And if this happens again? It won't. You have my word. Your word better be worth more now than it was 3 years ago. The foreman was dismissed, replaced with someone less aggressive. The Hendersons were left alone to build their homestead. Word spread across Black Ridge that Brock Maddox had confronted Silas Crow on behalf of strangers and won. The criticism about selling out faded, replaced with recognition that success hadn't erased his fundamental loyalties. But the incident forced Brock to confront uncomfortable truths. He'd built power through partnership with someone he didn't fully trust. He'd used that power for good this time, but power was seductive. How long before he started rationalizing questionable decisions? How long before protecting his own interests mattered more than protecting others? We're always going to be fighting this, Serafina said when he shared these thoughts. Success doesn't erase the temptation to compromise. Money doesn't automatically corrupt, but it makes corruption easier to justify. So what do? We stay vigilant. We remember where we came from. We use what we've built to help others build too. She took his hand. And we teach Clara that power is responsibility, not privilege. That having more means owing more, not deserving more. Clara, now approaching 5 years old, was already showing signs of inheriting her parents' stubborn independence. She refused dresses in favor of practical clothes, preferred horses to dolls, and questioned everything with the relentless curiosity of someone who'd never been taught that questions were inappropriate. One afternoon, she asked Brock why some families had big houses while others lived in small cabins. Because some people have more money, he answered carefully. Why? Different reasons. Some worked harder, some got lucky, some inherited it. Is that fair? The question, delivered with 5-year-old directness, cut to the core of everything Brock had been wrestling with. No, it's not fair. But fair and reality don't always match. Then shouldn't we make it fair? How would we do that? Clara thought about this with the seriousness she brought to all problems. Share. Mama says sharing is important. Out of the mouths of children, Brock thought. The simplicity of it, share, reduced complex economic and moral questions to their essence. He and Serafina had more now. Clara was right. They should share. They started small. Brock used partnership profits to fund low-interest loans for families wanting to expand operations or recover from setbacks. Serafina opened a training program, teaching young women horse handling and ranch management skills usually reserved for men. They worked with Martha Hendricks to establish a community fund for emergencies, medical crises, fire losses, disasters that could destroy families. The changes were incremental, not revolutionary. But they shifted Black Ridge's trajectory from every family for itself toward something resembling mutual support. Families helped each other with harvests, shared equipment, coordinated on infrastructure projects that benefited everyone. It wasn't perfect. People still fought, still resented perceived inequities, still struggled with jealousy and pride. But the community became something more than a collection of isolated homesteads. It became a network of people who'd learned that survival sometimes required putting aside differences in favor of shared purpose. Years accumulated. Clara grew from child to gangly adolescent to young woman who could ride anything with 4 legs and outwork most men twice her size. She inherited Serafina's fearless spirit and Brock's quiet strength, combined with her own fierce intelligence that demanded answers for everything. What am I supposed to do with my life? She asked Brock one evening when she was 16. They were mending fence together, the work rhythmic and familiar. Everyone assumes I'll marry some rancher's son, settle down, raise children, but that feels like surrender. To what? To expectations. To the idea that women are supposed to want certain things and nothing else. She hammered a post with unnecessary force. I want more than that, Papa. I want to build something, see things, matter in ways that aren't defined by who I marry or how many children I have. Brock smiled despite the seriousness of her question. She sounded exactly like Serafina had that first night, declaring her refusal to shrink for anyone's comfort. Then don't surrender, he said simply. Your mother and I didn't fight our whole lives just to see you accept limits we rejected. But what does that look like, practically? I don't know. You'll have to figure that out yourself. He set down his hammer, faced her fully. But I'll tell you what I've learned. Fighting for yourself is hard.
But fighting for something bigger than yourself is harder and more important. Your mother and I fought for this land, for our right to live on our terms. But the fighting that mattered most was for other people. For the Hendersons, for families Silas tried to crush, for building something that outlasts us. Clara absorbed this, chewing her lip the way she did when thinking hard. So purpose matters more than freedom? Purpose gives freedom meaning. Otherwise, you're just free to drift. She went off to Denver for education the following year, against the advice of everyone who thought mountain girls had no business pursuing formal learning. She studied business and law, absorbing knowledge with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. When she returned 3 years later, she started working with small ranchers on land rights and water disputes, using legal knowledge to protect people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Watching her help a young couple defend their claim against a wealthy land speculator, Brock felt something profound settle in his chest. This was the legacy that mattered, not land or money or even the partnership with Silas, but a daughter who'd learned that strength meant protecting those weaker, that success meant obligation, that being different was power rather than curse. Silas died in his sleep at 73, leaving behind an empire that fractured immediately among squabbling heirs. The partnership dissolved, but by then Brock had built enough independent success that it barely mattered. He continued trading livestock, investing profits in community projects, serving as the person people turned to when problems needed solving. Serafina developed arthritis in her hands, but kept training horses well into her 60s, working through pain with the same stubbornness that had defined her from the beginning. She and Brock grew old together in the cabin on Black Ridge, their walls covered with photographs of Clara's accomplishments and grandchildren they spoiled shamelessly. On an autumn evening, 43 years after Brock had first claimed his mountain land, he and Serafina sat on their porch watching the sun set over peaks they'd defended through violence and drought and legal battles and simple grinding persistence. "You ever regret it?" Serafina asked. Her voice had grown rough with age, but the steel underneath remained unchanged. The fighting, the struggling, choosing hard over easy every single time. Brock thought about the question seriously, reviewing decades of memory. The fear when Clara was born, the desperation of digging the well, the terror of facing armed men in darkness, the constant pressure, the moments when surrender seemed rational, the times when he doubted everything. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it." "Why not?" "Because the alternative was being someone else, living someone else's life, accepting limits I couldn't accept." He took her weathered hand in his. "We built something real, Serafina. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Our daughter knows who she is because we knew who we were. That matters more than comfort ever could." "We got lucky too. Could have ended differently." "Yeah. Could have died in that blizzard when Clara was born. Could have lost the well gamble. Could have been shot by Silas's hired guns. Luck played a role." He squeezed her hand gently. "But we made our own luck by refusing to quit, by standing when everyone expected us to fall." Serafina leaned her head against his massive shoulder, the two of them fitting together like they had for over 4 decades. "Think people will remember what we did here? Does it matter? Maybe not. But I'd like to think we changed something, made it easier for people like Clara, like the Hendersons, like everyone who comes after us and refuses to accept the world as they find it." "We did change something," Brock assured her. "Maybe not revolution, but evolution. Shifting what's possible, expanding what's acceptable. That's enough." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled across Black Ridge. Below them, lights flickered in cabins and homesteads, families living lives they'd chosen rather than accepting lives they'd been assigned. Not all of them, not even most. But enough that the mountain felt different than it had when Brock first arrived seeking solitude. The legend of the mountain giant and his wild bride had grown over the years, embellished with each retelling until the truth was buried under layers of myth. But Brock didn't care about legends. He cared about the reality. 2 difficult people who'd found each other, built something lasting despite impossible odds, and refused to let the world break them into acceptable shapes. That night, sleeping beside Serafina with moonlight streaming through windows they'd installed themselves, Brock dreamed of the young man he'd been, solitary, isolated, convinced that loneliness was strength. He wanted to tell that younger self that the greatest power wasn't independence but connection, that vulnerability was courage rather than weakness.
That love made you stronger precisely because it gave you something worth fighting for beyond yourself. He woke before dawn, as he'd done for 50 years, and watched Serafina sleep. Her face carried the map of their shared life, lines earned through laughter and tears, scars from work and weather, the weathering that came from refusing easy paths. She was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, still the stubborn force that had crashed into his ordered solitude and shown him what living actually meant. Clara visited that morning with her husband and 3 children, filling the cabin with noise and life. The grandchildren raced across property their grandfather had claimed from wilderness, playing in the shadow of the well that had saved them all, completely unaware that their freedom to be loud and wild and unconstrained had been purchased through battles they'd never fight themselves. "They don't know how hard it was," Clara said, watching her children with the mix of love and exasperation common to all parents. "Good," Serafina replied. "That means we succeeded. The point of fighting isn't to make future generations keep fighting the same battles. It's to win enough that they can fight different ones." Later, after everyone had left and quiet returned, Brock walked his property one final time. His leg still ached from the bullet wound he'd taken defending this land, a permanent reminder that some things cost blood. But looking at the thriving ranch, the strong buildings, the evidence of decades spent building rather than destroying, he couldn't classify any of it as cost. Investment, maybe. Price paid for prizes worth having. The mountain hadn't changed. It was still brutal, still beautiful, still indifferent to human struggle. But the people on it had changed. They'd learned that stubbornness could defeat impossible odds, that love could flourish in the hardest soil, that being different was strength rather than weakness. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that good people always win or that justice inevitably prevails, but that refusing to break has value in itself. That standing up matters even when you might fall down. That fighting for what you believe in creates ripples that spread further than you'll ever see. Brock Maddox had come to Black Ridge seeking peace and solitude. Instead, he'd found war, love, purpose, and meaning in a wild woman who refused to be anything but herself and a daughter who'd learned that lesson so well, she'd built her own life on the same foundation. Standing on his mountain, watching the sun set over land he'd defended through every method civilization and nature could throw at him, Brock understood something profound. He'd searched for peace in the wrong place. Peace wasn't found in solitude or safety or comfort. It was found in knowing you'd lived according to principles that mattered, loved people worth fighting for, and left the world slightly better than you found it. The giant of Black Ridge had become something more than legend and less than myth. He'd become human in all the messy, complicated, beautiful ways that actually mattered, and that, more than any story people would tell about him, was worth every moment of struggle it took to get there.